All right, morning checklist. Let's see. You wake up, eat breakfast, see that UCLA is in the top 25. They're not in the top 25? What are we doing?
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Locked On UCLA podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. Thanks for making this show your first listen each and every day. It's free wherever you get your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for your support. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Check it out. Where we get started is, I wasn't even going to go here. I was like, all right, UCLA is going to be ranked. They've won 7 in a row. The Bruins have now compiled a record of, I believe, 18-6, right? I thought this was going to be an afterthought. I didn't think I was going to have to sit on here another week and tell me that they're not ranked. UCLA is 18-6, 9-4 in a pretty deep Big Ten conference, which puts them in 4th place. Just beat a top 10 team in Michigan State. Just completed a 7-0 West Coast stint, where at the time they beat 3 top 20 teams. All right. They beat Oregon so badly, UCLA did, that Oregon is not even considered a quad 1 win for their win at home against the Ducks because they destroyed Oregon so bad. The Bruins are not ranked in the AP top 25. And some of you will be like, all right, let's take this shade, take the neglect from the pollsters, the voters. All right. Yeah. But this is blatant disrespect. Blatant. And that's my job to tell you such. And why I'm going to tell you why it's ridiculous. UCLA comes in, you go with their net ranking, right? That's a very analytical way of saying, all right, what have they done based on their schedule, with their wins, with their losses, when, where, and how, and why. Okay. The net ranking has UCLA ranked at 25, but they're still ranked. UCLA, if you go based off what their wins and losses tell you, their wins and losses, UCLA is a quad 1 team that has 6 wins, so quite a few quad 1 wins. We talk about Oregon having so many quad 1 wins. They have 8, at least at the time. UCLA's got 6, and based off quad 1 categories, which is as good of a win as you can get in college basketball between home wins, neutral site wins, and road wins, UCLA, all their losses have been quad 1 losses. That means UCLA, theoretically, if you put in where they played, who they played, does not have a terrible loss. They do not, which is ludicrous. You got Kansas going to K-State and losing, all right? Kansas, yeah, they beat Iowa State. They're still in the teens in the rankings. You got Creighton, who's just barely by wins the hottest team in the country, just over UCLA, because their winning streak started a week earlier. Creighton, a team that is ranked just above UCLA in the rankings, whose net is much lower than the Bruins. They come in there with less quad 1 wins than the Bruins, 3 uglier losses when it comes to quad 2 losses. Some of those are similar to UCLA, but they have some ugly losses in terms of where they lost, who they lost, and how they lost. Creighton. And they just got in the top 25 because they've won 9 in a row. UCLA, you're telling me they completed a pretty daunting 7-game stretch and won every single one of their games. All right. They couldn't beat Penn State by 40 because the team was too busy with what Mick Cronin said after the game Saturday, as he looked very ill with what was suspected to be the norovirus. So they're either literally stuck in the restroom, barfing. You know, if you had the norovirus lately, that's one of those things going around. It is not pretty. Nor was it for Penn State on Saturday. And that's what the Bruins, playing almost ill or less than 100%. And they played focus. And if you go just by numbers, by the eye test, UCLA played Michigan State, forced them into a lot of turnovers. The Bruins didn't turn over. They played Penn State, who, yes, is down some very big-time pieces and is hurting. But now that we know UCLA wasn't feeling that well too, the Bruins still didn't turn it over. And I think Cronin said after the game there wasn't 4 turnovers, there's only 3. So what, UCLA's last 2 games, a combined 6 turnovers? All right, maybe the offense isn't doing it for you, AP poll. Maybe it's not the most sexy to look at. But when you're not turning it over, Cronin said, we're going to cut down the freaking nets and we're going to go deep in this tournament if they're playing this crisply on offense. And that didn't involve really good play from Bilodeau. It was a great defensive day by Johnson. I don't know how you didn't watch that Penn State game and just say UCLA is peaking. A true trap game. And UCLA is like, nah, we are just going to come out here and literally dish a beatdown of the Penn State Nittany Lions. After they led the majority of the game against Michigan State. Okay, Michigan State comes west to play 2 LA schools, USC and UCLA. They drop what? 2 spots? 2 spots? And then they miss a guy because he's sick or ill against Oregon, but they came back to beat the Ducks at home. UCLA is not even close in the AP polls. I know they are short of Maryland, all right? Top 25 team that has plummeted down the rankings. They have tumbled all the way down to 25. So if you're telling me UCLA is held out of the top 25 because they lost to Maryland in January, okay, all right. I can understand Maryland being ranked higher than UCLA. They played well. They got some good wins. They beat the Bruins pretty good when the Bruins weren't playing well. But you're telling me that there are 25 better teams in the Bruins. I didn't believe that even though the Bruins were not playing well. And now that they flipped a script, beating some really good teams, all right? Beating some really, really good teams. If you look at it, they don't actually have a terrible loss when you factor in home, road, neutral site losses. As much as an eyesore as that North Carolina loss looks, it's still not analytically a bad loss in a neutral site cross-country game where they lost by 2, where they led by 16. Nebraska. Well, Nebraska's got some pretty sneaky good home wins, and I think a good road win too. All right? They're flirting with the bubble. SC is playing so well that UCLA's road win against SC without their best scorer, Tyler Bilodeau, is a quad 1 win. Just a couple weeks ago. Just a week ago. Whatever that was. Ridiculous. The Bruins are not losing to bad teams at home. They are beating pretty good. They've got a couple of good road wins, especially when Bilodeau was hurt, and they just took care of business in one of the best stretches UCLA's played, not only this year, but in the last few years under Mick Cronin. All right. Now, I know the Tiger Campbell and the Jaime Jaquez Jr. team was really good, gotten a really good winning streak, but this team is playing pretty damn near perfect. I don't know what else they can do. And I was going to talk about this next segment, but Illinois and Indiana, yes, even though Indiana's about to part ways with Mike Woodson, they are still technically, if you go to Bloomington, you go play Illinois in the Fighting Illini, this week is still 2 more quad 1 wins. All right, that's why this week is so tough, on top of the illness, on top of the competition, and the travel, with the time change, all that. UCLA still can have more chances to impress everybody. I am flat out stunned that they're not even ranked in the top 25. I thought they'd be in the top 20. They'd be maybe a ranking around 18, 19. Just about everybody lost in the top 25. And the best UCLA could do is be the 26th best team. The team receiving the most votes, just ahead of UConn, just double the amount of points and votes of Illinois, Louisville, New Mexico, all right? So you got UCLA, who currently has wins over a Michigan State team, an Arizona team on a neutral site in Arizona, a Wisconsin team. So that's 3 current wins for UCLA against top 16 teams. And 2 of those came in the last couple weeks. What are we watching? And Wisconsin's only looking better in the standings with their wins the last couple of weeks. Like, Kansas has more losses than UCLA just because they beat Iowa State at Fog Allen, whatever. Get over that crap. That's nonsense. It's so much of a statement. I need to come on here with the handlebar mustache and bring it back. Like, come on. My mother's ready to disown me with this mustache, and I'm ready to disown the AP Top 25 pollers from what we're doing with no UCLA ranking in the top 25. Throw me a bone and put a 25 next to their name, for goodness gracious. All right? Don't come at me when they're going to sit there this week and maybe they struggle. Maybe they lose one or two because they're playing tough teams on the road and they're sick with the norovirus. They're still a top 25 team, whether they win both games, one or lose both. I'm still not going to be convinced that they are not deserving at this very junction of the season with 7 straight wins. All of this against pretty good competition, a sleeping giant, not giant, but rising good USC team who is has been without one of their best players. UCLA played, I believe, SC when they were healthy, and UCLA wasn't. Still went on the road to Washington without their leading scorer at their time. They have peaked. And their worst, you could argue their worst performance was by some of their best players against Penn State because they're sick and they kicked their living daylights out of Penn State. Because it's stuck on the Big Ten network that they forgot. They're like, they only beat Penn State by 24. You mean that team that has played every other team in the Big Ten shorthanded and nearly beat them? Penn State and UCLA said, you know what? We're just going to go give them a leg up because we're not feeling well and then still destroy them and play extremely well while doing it. I don't understand what we're watching. I thought it was a joke that the UCLA women weren't unanimously number one in the AP poll. I thought it was. And now there are really good teams that can make cases. Notre Dame has all those things, right? Just to go on a little sidebar. I thought that was a joke. No, I don't understand because UCLA, the women, they do have now a unanimous number one ranking. The men, how are they not in the top 20? I just don't understand it, right? Marquette's got a similar, I'm going to just go look at Marquette right now. So many of these teams have the same record as UCLA, have come off some wins, some losses. Marquette, who some were thinking a top 10, top 25. Marquette in the AP poll is ranked 18th. Their net ranking is just ahead, just a smidge ahead of UCLA. Net 24. UCLA has more quad one wins than Marquette, then Creighton, then I believe I have Kansas up here, then Kansas. UCLA actually doesn't have a losing record against quad one like Kansas does. Marquette, who is in the teens, like the 18th best team in the country, according to this top 25 poll, just lost at Creighton. Not a terrible loss. Marquette's got 2 quad 2 losses. All right, 2. Both of those came at home. UCLA doesn't have a quad 2 loss. They don't have a terrible home loss. And they've got more wins against quad 1 teams, and some of which, because these teams are playing better, I just don't understand. I flat out do not understand when you add in how well they're playing, how well they played the last week, and then they just get nothing. Like, they're not a point away from being behind Maryland, who I can understand being ranked ahead of UCLA. The head-to-head has to matter. But I still think UCLA should be in there. Like, goodness gracious, man. What are we doing? I'm going to try and keep calm and sane to talk about this upcoming road trip and the difficulties of it, because UCLA, in my mind, is a top 20 team. You go to the bracketology by Joe Lunardi. Sorry, I'm still going on. Bracketology. Joe Lunardi has UCLA as a 5 seed. All right. That's who I kind of trust the most when it comes to bracketology expertise. UCLA is a 5 seed. If you multiply between 4 regions, 5 seeds times 4 regions with all those teams, that's the 20th best team. UCLA, by Joe Lunardi's analytics, is the 20th best team or 18th best team. You could be a 7 seed in other brackets. 7 times 4 would mean UCLA is like a 28th best team, right? They're like the 26th best team. Lunardi thinks that they're like 6 spots better. What are we watching? What are we talking about? This is utterly bonkers. Whatever. I know Mick Cronin will act like he doesn't care. He's probably still trying to get on the mend because he said he was in bed for the last few days prior to the UCLA game, and he's not going to give any zingers. And I know he likes to fuel the team, but don't tell me he didn't take notice. He's like, what? Because he's like, oh yeah, Michigan State's top 17. It'll go by analytics. But analytics say they're there. Their eye test is saying they're there. Who they've beaten says they've been there. The winning streak, everything adds up to it. What are we watching? I'm not going to go on a list and find every pollster and just be like, why'd you do this? Why'd you do this? But at some point, how is being in a nationally relevant conference helping UCLA right now? If they're playing well, have beaten some of those teams in the conference that are ranked much higher than UCLA, and they're still not in the top 25. And then the national bracketologist for, the 4 letters, he has them as a top 20 team. I think they're a top 20 team and can contend on a deep tournament run, and they've got absolutely nothing to show for it right now. And when they go on this tough road trip this week, it's only going to be, we realize they're going to lose this week, and all of a sudden, they're not deserving of a top 25 ranking when they go on the road to Illinois and Indiana and don't win both of them. They're both quad 1 games. Ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous. I don't know. I don't know. All right. Ran over. I think. Ridiculous. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. There's no better place to get in on FanDuel than going with America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, and so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to be on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. All right, you can use the live betting feature with FanDuel because it keeps you with every moment and keep the game exciting, whether it's a late-game rally, a player to hit a clutch 3. You can never feel like you've missed your chance. And the app's super easy to use, and you get paid instantly when you win. Right now, new customers with FanDuel can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com today. Again, that's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. I'll be quite honest. I'm not sure how I just did that ad read. Calm. I don't really know. I still don't know as we move into segment 2 that the Bruins, I saw this top 25 and I thought it was last week's. I kid you not. And then I was like, wait a minute. There's Creighton. There's Clemson. Mississippi State somewhere there. Ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous. I think it will correct itself at some point. And if it doesn't, then what basketball are we watching? Literally, what basketball are we watching? Coming up next for the Bruins, they have an utterly tough road trip. As I mentioned in the first segment, this Illinois-Indiana trip is tough for quite a few reasons. One, just because UCLA is coming to town, and now that they're red hot, it's going to intensify and amplify the crowd for when UCLA comes to the Midwest, right? In the early part of the season when UCLA went to Nebraska, when they went to Maryland, when they got to Rutgers, they all beat them, so it got a little old, right? So UCLA, at this moment, does not have a win, I think, east of Arizona, if I'm not mistaken. So the Bruins have yet to go on the road and beat any of their new Midwest brothers or East Coast brothers, if you include Maryland or Rutgers, which they won't get the chance in this 20-game Big Ten schedule. You don't get a home and home. You get one shot to prove that you're capable of competing with Illinois on the road, who's also just on the edge of the top 25. Not after their last couple of weeks where they've struggled, but UCLA has a tough matchup. Just because they're coming, all the fans are going to go rabid and be crazy. It should be a sellout. The way UCLA is playing will just energize these teams, right? There's something about, all right, if you had played UCLA in January and you're at home, you're like, everybody's beating UCLA, right? They're being, all right, everybody beats them. Now, with the added fun that UCLA is winning 7 in a row, the crowd should be crazy. For Illinois, their team that's been in and out, they were a top 10 team, top 15. They've slowly found themselves falling out of the rankings right now. Illinois comes in with 7 losses, although it's not going to be easy. They're a team that was last year capable of going deep in the tournament. They're 16-8, not 7 losses, 16-8. They've won 1. They're 10-3 at home, so a very tough team to beat. Illinois has given up lots of points in certain aspects, but they've lost some close games and been very close to beating what was a then #1 in Tennessee team in mid-December, right? It took to the very end at the buzzer for Tennessee to beat them. And Tennessee's still a very quality team. Auburn's #1, but Tennessee, if we look at these rankings, is what? The 5th best team in the country, even though they've lost a few. So Illinois, it takes what was then the number one team in the country a last-second shot to beat them. All right? Illinois this year has beaten Arkansas on a neutral floor. They have beaten Wisconsin, which is now a top 16 win, almost beat Tennessee. They beat Missouri. Missouri's in the top 25. That was in St. Louis, so a tough matchup there. They came in and with their beatdown, Illinois' beatdown of Oregon earlier in January, that kind of showcased, I think, to the rest of the Big Ten that the Ducks potentially might be frauds. They might be a little fraudulent, or they're going to go on a humongous slump. And with Illinois going to Oregon and beating them by 32, in Eugene, mind you, UCLA went to Eugene, had a lead, led for 30 minutes, but struggled to close it out. Illinois just made it a big joke when they blew them out. Then they struggled to beat Washington. They also blew out Penn State. But this Illinois team, they started to struggle after they, at home, I think, a top 15 team, were near the top of the Big Ten standings, struggled to beat USC. And USC went on the road and beat this Illinois team by 10, and Illinois led at the half. So USC went on the road with Des Claude putting up 31 in Champaign. So USC is gone here. So it's kind of hit and miss. They lost at Michigan State. They also lost to Maryland in a beatdown, lost to Nebraska. And because Nebraska beat Illinois, I think that put Nebraska in the quad one territory for UCLA, where UCLA losing at Nebraska was a little bit solidified. It's not as ugly because Illinois also lost to Nebraska. And that was in overtime, very different loss, but that's the case. Illinois also recently lost at Rutgers, but then returned to go to Minneapolis and win by 21 points. So some of their uglier losses have come on the road, right? 5 of their 8 losses away from home. And their 3 home losses, it came in leading at half against SC, losing by 2 points to Tennessee, and then an absolute beatdown to Maryland. So what the Bruins need to do is kind of invoke that Maryland-type pressure. I know Kevin Willard and Mick Cronin play different types of defense. Yet UCLA, they've got to find ways to score on an Illinois team that likes to score and run. This could be similar, I think, potentially to the Wisconsin game if it goes into the high-scoring variety, or if the Bruins are playing as great as they are, as a top 20 team, which they're not currently reflected in any rankings. The AP poll is just, the king of all the rankings. They're not in that ranking, whatever. UCLA, in a worst case win, will win this game like Wisconsin. High scoring, energized crowd, a game that Cronin doesn't want to play in terms of the high scoring back and forth variety if Illinois is scoring well. If the Bruins are going to win this game, I think it might be like a 72-67 type game. All right. A little more high scoring, but the Bruins still clamped the Fighting Illini down with what they've been able to do. Because Illinois has gone from, they're going to be a top tier Big Ten contender, to now they got 8 losses, and they're ranked behind UCLA. Every Big Ten team, for the most part, has seen one of their 2 ugly losses this year. Illinois averages 85 points per game and allows 71. And when teams allow 71 points per game, that usually bodes well for the Bruins, who have figured out different ways, right? They've got Tomislav Ivicic. You've got Will Riley, who comes off the bench. They've got different guys who can score 10 or more. 4 separate Illinois players score 11 or more points. So the emphasis is to make sure Illinois, which doesn't shoot all that well from 3, but they shoot a lot of them. They like to shoot their 3-pointers, get to the free throw line, and just out-rebound you. Illinois out-rebounds their opponents by 12. They shoot close to 250 more 3-pointers than their opponents and have made just about 80 more, just at a slightly better clip. And they tend to keep teams under 40% shooting. But they allow a lot of points. So the key is, do the Bruins get any calls on the road? Will they score? And can they make sure Illinois does not just blow the roof off like Wisconsin did from the 3-point line? But this is at Illinois, so it's going to be a much tougher atmosphere than playing at home at Pauley Pavilion. UCLA also has to play an Indiana team that came very close to beating Michigan. Indiana's got size. UCLA plays them on a Friday. And I know Indiana's trending downward, but they beat UCLA on Friday, which would still represent at this moment a road win for UCLA over Indiana, would still represent a quad one win. That tells you how tough these games are. While we cannot forget that UCLA is coming off a big West Coast stint, so they haven't had to leave home. They literally all had half the team in norovirus, including the coach. And I know I've had norovirus lately. I suspected norovirus, something similar. And I had mild symptoms in November when I went from LA to New York, and it hit me in New York. It took me a day or two to get over that. So as long as they've gone through the 24, 48-hour window and they're okay, but that doesn't mean you don't get dehydrated when you're flying. That doesn't mean you still got to change and deal with all the travel. And you're going to be gone for a week. They have to get used to that. All right, we're going to be gone for a week plus. They're still having to replenish the fluids if they had norovirus that they lost, while adding on to the travel and the time change. A lot of traveling going from Illinois to Bloomington, Indiana. And the fans aren't going to be nice. They're not going to treat you well. They're not going to be your best friends. That's obviously the case in the Big Ten. The Bruins have to prove they can win east of Phoenix. All right? They have to win east of Phoenix. And until the Bruins do that this year, right, UCLA probably won't get much respect. The furthest east UCLA's won was when they played Arizona in a neutral site game at the Footprint Center. Every game east of that, they've lost. When they went to Madison Square Garden, when they went to Nebraska, when they went to Maryland and to Rutgers. When UCLA just wins one of these games, then they'll get their 7th quad one win. Hopefully both. The thing I think is I could see a world where UCLA wins the game against Illinois, and then Indiana comes in and upsets the Bruins, and maybe they go on a streak and figure out a way to sneak into the tournament at the end, even though they're not even clearly in. A lot of weird things could happen this week, which makes it a scary week for Bruins who are coming off a road trip, a homestand where they're sick. Michigan State, after they left LA, they had some players sick. That's why they had a slow start against Oregon. Like Tom Izzo wasn't feeling well. Some of the Michigan State players. So something happened Tuesday-wise or around the UCLA campus where everybody got sick. I'm not sure if that affected the UCLA-Michigan State game. Maybe it did a little bit. But the players going after the UCLA-Michigan State game for both Sparty and the Bruins felt it later, whether it's in bulk like the Bruins or in smaller effects for Michigan State. Something went around. And it doesn't help that the Bruins had a lot. It did help. The 4 days off or 3 days off did help. From Wednesday, Thursday, Friday to a midday Saturday game. I thought it was weird that they had that, but apparently the schedule makers knew the Bruins needed the extra day to get well, which is good. Speaking of what's going to be a big week this week, the UCLA women in another season-defining week of women's college basketball. The Bruins take on their bitter, bitter rivals. All right, so here we go. This is UCLA USC week, and this isn't going to stand as your official UCLA USC preview. We still got a couple of days from now to do that. But the Bruins are 23-0 in overall, unanimous number 1, 11-0 in conference, and we had our first significant change in a while in the AP Top 25 poll. That's because South Carolina went to Austin, lost to Texas. If you're watching any pre-sporting events, pre-Super Bowl sporting events, then you could have watched some big-time college basketball because LSU is creeping up the standings. They had a big win against Tennessee, who just beat UConn. So USC is now in the 6th spot. We've flipped the top 4 because now Texas and Notre Dame need some respect with their big wins, or just Notre Dame has some of the best wins in the country, like going into Galen Center and beating the Trojans by double figures. And USC is just sitting there with their one Big Ten loss, hoping for a chance to get the Bruins to beat them and tie them for the lead in the Big Ten standings, because USC also took care of business. Slow start against Ohio State, and then they beat them down. UCLA went to Eugene and had fits. And this is a worrying trend because the Bruins have not played well in recent games, in my mind, at least in the beginning. They had a 3-game East Coast trip. UCLA handled those games pretty easily, although the best team, Maryland, was missing some players with injuries. The Bruins took care of business because of a big Lauren Betts day. Last 3 games, There hasn't been a lot of Lauren bets. A little quiet against Minnesota, less so against Ohio State. And then against Oregon, UCLA is like, turned it over again. Last few games, I think UCLA has turned it over upwards of 40 times. Against Oregon, UCLA had 18 turnovers. Against Ohio State, they had 23. So you put those two together, if I can do some quick math, that's 43 turnovers. That's not the number one team in the country playing at its best, folks. All right. And I know Ohio State, they got a good up-tempo pressure. They can play full-court defense. They can force you into some pretty terrible passes. This is another game where Lauren Betts scored less than 10 points, had less than 10 rebounds, 4 turnovers. You mix in Kiki Rice. UCLA's best player in Kiki Rice, 4 points, 4 turnovers. Now, if what we've heard were the men had the norovirus, then, and I think the women were at that game on Tuesday when the Bruins played Michigan State, right? Because UCLA then played the next day at home against Ohio State. So if it's going around UCLA athletics, then I guess I haven't seen any close comments at this moment, but maybe understandable. This was a game where London Jones stepped up for the Bruins against the Oregon Ducks. She hit 5 of 7 threes. And while UCLA did lead this game for like 38 minutes, the lead changed once. Oregon kept it annoyingly close the whole way through. That maybe it wasn't, if you're looking at it from an outside perspective, you never thought Oregon was going to win, but it was annoyingly close for a team that had been blown out in recent games. Oregon's got some wins. They've stacked up quite a few wins this year. I think 15, 16, 17 wins. They just haven't been that same dominant force like when they had Saprudi and Escu and everything else. With UCLA, London Jones, who can do these types of performances, shoot 60% from the field, won't miss from 3. Every other Bruin was not that good in this game. Just not. With London Jones, she shot the ball well in 30 minutes. No other player played as many minutes as she did. Gardner wasn't shooting as well. She played only 15 minutes in this game. UCLA, 7 of 17 from 3, 41%, decent percentage. That was pretty much the London Jones, I'm going to will my team to victory during a terrible, terrible stretch of play. And she did that against USC last year, which gives me hope that if she's red hot from 3, she's been shooting much better these last couple of weeks, London Jones has, that she can carry her torrid shooting into the USC game, and that's what can put UCLA over the top. Because it's not going to be a 40-point performance by Lauren Betts. It's not going to be a Kiki Rice, 25, 10, and 11, or something ridiculous, right? Triple-double watch. It's going to be the depth that UCLA has to compete against USC's depth. As much as I'm going to build up, yes, Juju Watkins and Lauren Betts, although they're not going to have a direct head-to-head matchup in terms of offense versus defense, it's going to come down to, is USC efficient shooting, right? Does Juju take too many shots? Or does UCLA turn it over 30 times? Because USC is going to amp up the pressure. I think this game might play out like that Pac-12 tournament classic, if you will, where it was a much lower scoring game when UCLA and USC played for the 3rd time last year. There could be a case to be made that these two teams could score a lot of points. But when UCLA played USC in the Pac-12 tournament last year in the semifinals, UCLA SC went to double overtime and scored the majority of their points there. This game ended in regulation 59-59. That's when they played March 8th in Vegas in the Pac-12 tournament semis, and then USC went to win the Pac-12 tournament championship. So I could see with the way Juju struggled, she hasn't played her best game last 3 games. She has not. Lauren Betts did make an impact with 11 assists, but has had a couple of games where after I so boldly proclaim she deserves this highly, the best accolades, right? Best player of the country, National Player of the Year, Wooden Award, whatever you want to call all the Best Player of the Year awards. She deserves it. She hasn't been as dominant offensively. Teams have double-teamed her, triple-teamed her, forced her to pass it out, and that's where London Jones comes in needing to score, and the Bruins have force-fed Betts at times passes while turning it over at an absurd amount of times for a number 1 ranked team in the country. They are not playing well at this moment, and they can still beat teams by double figures. Now, Betts did get a technical. It's one of those games that got buried on the Big Ten Plus, so you maybe didn't watch it. But UCLA, it was one of those ugly road wins against a Pac-12 legacy school who probably knows how to coach and has played UCLA quite a few times the last few years. So knows what UCLA has with Lauren Betts and Kiki Rice and knew how to game plan. And they made it tough on the Bruins. They did. But UCLA, by no stretch, is going to win this game at USC if they turn it over more than 15 times. That is the number I'm going to stick with right now. If you turn it over more than 15 times in regulation, and unless they're playing really absurd defense or Lauren Betts gets 10 blocks, you're not going to win against USC on the road. You're just not. As much as I believe in the team to go and be the number one team, they're the best team, they're the most talented team, you will not win at USC if you turn it over at a, 18 turnovers per game clip, basically, these last 20. If I'm 43, that's 20. That's 21 turnovers a game. Who am I kidding? Where's my math coming from? You do that, you're not going to win on the road against a top 6 team in the country with one of the best players in the country. You're not going to do that. I believe in their adjustments and they can game plan, but teams have found ways to mess with the Bruins. SC, I think, is the first team that is good enough to beat the Bruins with this newfound UCLA scuffling on offense. They're just, they're not playing as well. Betts has been quieted a little bit. And if they're not shooting well from 3, they're at a bit of an uh-oh stage. We'll talk more and get more in depth about what USC is doing struggling-wise, because they've lost twice this year, and how the Bruins can beat them despite their offensive turnover woes. Because they can shoot it, and they got the best players in the country. So just a little teaser. We're going to get more in-depth taste as well. And if you're outraged, just like I am, that UCLA is not ranked in the top 25, well, let me tell you, we're going to learn a lot in the next 5 days. All right? A lot in the next 5 days. So get your hands up, Bruins fans. Aggressive 8-clap time. All right? And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, UCLA. UCLA, fight, fight, fight. This has been Locked On UCLA. Zach signing off. Go Bruins.